Welcome to The Left Unsaid, Episode 7. The Left Unsaid, the podcast where we open the national fridge, throw out the expired myths, and sniff out what can be salvaged.
This week, we'll return to the belly of the beast, domestic politics, to rip apart Trump's $4.5 trillion budget bill, aka oligarchic looting plan. We'll break down what's in the bill, how it's quietly murdering people with paperwork and poverty, and bringing a truly massive expansion of fascist border law enforcement. Meanwhile, the genocide rages on in Gaza, 2 Israeli consulate employees were shot in D.C., and the Anti-Defamation League blames it on our favorite Twitch streamer. Plus, in this episode, Miss Rachel inspired Meg to speak out more loudly for Palestine and should inspire you too. Colombia's president gets drowned out during her commencement address, and the U.S. empire continues to kneecap its own soft power by going after Harvard's international students.
I'm Patrick McElwee, and I'm joined by my lovely wife, Meg McElwee.
Hey, everyone.
And my son,
Finn McElwee.
We've reached episode 7.
All right. Go us.
I'm not like one of these mystical number people, but I did grow up Catholic, so I am aware that the number 7 is a very important age.
Really?
Yeah, it's a very important number. It's one of these, like the number 3 of the Holy Trinity, but 7 has been long considered to be one of these perfect numbers. So if we just get to 7 and we stop here, I'll be fine. But we don't want to stop. We'd like to keep going.
No, we really like doing this.
It takes a lot of work just to edit these together, to prepare for them, to record them. We love doing it. We want to keep doing it. If you'd like to support us in doing that, we have now put a little contribution button at theleftunsaid.net. We welcome that. We would love to add things like interviews, video along with the audio.
Yeah, that would take a lot more editing time, wouldn't it?
And just time to get the word out. Because honestly, by the time we record and we edit and we publish, we got day jobs to do. So a little bit of help would definitely help us invest more in this. If you like it, okay, but not that much, feel free to keep listening for free. We've got no plans to paywall anything.
Nope, no plans.
Keep putting these episodes out every week that we're able. And if you don't have the cash to donate, a review, a rating, that's perfect. The goal right now is just to let more people know that we exist.
And just a reminder to everybody, we're a dialectical family. We enjoy sitting down and talking about things. We think that learning happens best in conversation and also in questioning. So if you have a question, a critique, or you just want to add your voice to the conversation, you can go to theleftunsaid.net, push the little yellow microphone button, and leave us a question or comment. We'd love to bring you all into this family conversation that we have here in our living room.
And if you're shy about recording something, feel free to leave us a written comment on any platform. We are checking those. Okay, so in this episode, we're planning to pay more attention to domestic politics here in the United States because the oligarchy is banding together just like out in the open to steal from the poor.
Oh, so blatant.
So we're going to talk about Trump's big, beautiful budget bill, of course.
Okay, I have to say, I don't know about you all, but a word that I used to enjoy was beautiful. And now I just don't like the word beautiful anymore.
I think you're beautiful.
Oh, please don't call me beautiful.
Okay, so
Trump just uses it so much, Anyway, it's become sort of one of these Orwellian phrases.
It's his second favorite word behind tariff.
Oh, true.
Is that right?
I think so.
You should make a word cloud.
Yeah, maybe.
Those word clouds were I gotta say, AI is blowing everybody's mind today, but in the year 1999, the word cloud was the AI of the time. We put them everywhere. Yeah, so it's a big, beautiful budget bill. We'll take a look. It's pretty fantastically awful. But the ongoing genocide in Gaza continues, sadly, to be an incredibly important story for Americans and the world to focus on. Kids are literally starving to death. I should say kids are literally being starved to death by Israel and by everybody who's enabling Israel, the United States and Europe.
Yeah.
It's just completely horrendously awful. A few aid trucks have been allowed to get in, but the human rights community says that they need hundreds of trucks.
And Oxfam reported that of the 5 trucks that were let in at the beginning of this last week with supposed aid, that 2 of them actually contained only funeral shrouds, which is just sick.
Ugh.
And really, the UN is saying that the number of trucks that needs to be brought in is hundreds and hundreds a day, thousands a week. And it's just the amount of aid getting in is nowhere near this number, and it's not even being delivered to the north of Gaza.
And meanwhile, none of this is getting the media attention that it deserves. There's been stories in the New York Times, but nothing on the scale that this kind of intentional starvation demands.
Right. It should be headline news. But if you get a report, it's buried.
And meanwhile, we did get a burst of news about the shooting of these two young Israeli consulate employees in Washington, D.C. by an alleged perpetrator who then went on to yell, "Free Palestine." And that got wall-to-wall coverage on TV news and in print. And it was seized upon by certain people who want to suppress any solidarity with Palestinians to try to ramp up that repression. I want to play a little clip here from Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. What he said about somebody we talked about last week here on the podcast, Hassan Piker, famous left-wing Twitch streamer who has had a lot of solidarity with Palestinians. Here's what Jonathan Greenblatt had to say immediately following this deadly shooting.
All of us need to call it out. I'm thinking about the New York Times doing a gauzy profile a few weeks ago of this gamer, Hassan Piker, who regularly employs awful genocidal rhetoric against Jewish people in the Jewish state. Extremists should not be empowered. People who spout prejudice should not be platformed. This is a moment when we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, we've got to stop this because the consequences are deadly.
So Jonathan Greenblatt's upset that the New York Times would pay attention to someone like Hassan Piker because he's got solidarity with Palestinians, as we discussed last week.
It's clearly just another part of their effort to try to conflate Judaism with Zionism and anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. You know, Hassan Piker has for a really long time stood up against anti-Semitism and is continuing to call it out where it most often arrives, which is in the extreme right in the United States and a lot of neo-Nazi groups. It's ridiculous to say that Hassan Piker is in any way motivated by anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, here at the Left Unsaid, you're not going to see us ever celebrating the death of anybody. We are, at our core, we're humanist, right? Like we want to try to see the universe that exists within each human, no matter what someone's guilty of. I personally would not be able to or think it was morally justified to kill anybody. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't be against putting hardened, guilty folks behind bars in a humane way.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly a lot of people who ought to be put on trial for what is happening in Gaza. Obviously, the people at the top to be put on trial, but anyone volunteering to support a government that's actively involved in genocide is part of one of the most heinous crimes that human beings can commit.
Yeah.
And should be put on trial for that.
Right. But even in our little family, right, like we had a discussion before this, like proportionality wise, right? Why should we necessarily be focusing on two people here when there are just far more people dying in Gaza, which is also an interesting ethical argument. We should be having these ethical discussions. If it's focused on an individual or focused on a group, we should be having these moral discussions. Nathan Robinson, who runs Current Affairs magazine, wrote into the ethicist column in the New York Times. In this column, they touch on things like, oh, should I call out my mother-in-law for her behavior towards my daughter about this? I mean, they're mostly little interpersonal ethical dilemmas that they touch upon. But Nathan Robinson kind of calls out the ethicist here. He says, to the ethicist, I have a tricky conundrum of an ethical dilemma. My country is sending billions of dollars of arms to fund a genocide. Hundreds of people were just killed in a single day, including children. These children died gruesomely, blown to pieces by weapons built in my country and shipped abroad. Medical professionals estimate that over 100,000 people have been killed already. Food supplies have been completely blocked, resulting in mass starvation, in which the sickest and weakest people die first. All of the houses, mosques, schools, markets are being flattened and destroyed, making the territory entirely uninhabitable to prepare for a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing directed against those who survived the bombardment and starvation. Yet when I open my newspaper, the country's leading ethics columnist is not discussing any of this, and is instead opining on such questions as, is it ethical to buy used books? Should I quit Facebook because of all the Trump supporters? Can I use AI to look better online? Can I leave a bad review for my hairdresser? And can we ask a disabled woman to leave our pickleball group? It seems pretty unethical to me to think about questions like these when I'm morally complicit in the mass murder of children. But I'm not an ethicist. So my question is it ethical to just sit and read about trivial bullshit in your newspaper and pretend that people aren't being killed with our tax dollars? Also, is it ethical to be an ethicist who ignores the most pressing ethical issues of their time? Also, would it be ethical for me to flood the ethicist's mailbox every day with the photos and names of dead Palestinian children until they develop a functioning moral compass? Then he signs off. And I think that kind of encapsulates my feelings about how this shooting should be sort of put in context. We shouldn't deny it, but we should also not focus on it, and we should continue to center the suffering of the Palestinians in our discussions.
I absolutely feel that. I hear that proportionality argument. I guess I do think it's worth us talking about as the pro-Palestinian solidarity movement, because this was done by somebody who claims to be part of our movement. And I do find it morally gross and reprehensible that he would gun down two young people who want to be diplomats in the Israeli government, sure. But it's on us to articulate what we think are viable ways of achieving the justice that we need to see in the world. It's something that alarms me to see because it feels to me like the actions of a lone wolf working on his own, not as part of a movement. You see that the main organizations that have been organizing the most important actions to raise awareness and turn the tide of public consciousness in the United States and around the world came out to condemn it. I mean, that includes Jewish Voices for Peace, If Not Now, and also the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which he apparently had been a member of years and years ago.
Yeah, it seems like very lightly.
So while I understand the anger and I understand people wanting to say, well, was it justified to kill Nazis in reference to this? I think that tactically it's just a terrible thing for people to do. It's not the way that Palestinian genocide is going to come to an end.
Yeah.
And it worries me because if you look at history, this kind of a tactic is exactly what the right-wing governments can seize on to bring down the hammer of repression. Hitler, 4 weeks after he was named chancellor, got the opportunity to suspend civil liberties across Germany because of a fire that got set in the German parliament, the Reichstag. They got rid of habeas corpus, they got rid of the right of free expression, the right of free press, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the Nazis used that to solidify power. They used it to deny the communists, who were actually an important political party in Germany, from being able to run in the next election, et cetera, et cetera. It really set the Nazis on the path to consolidating power. Illegitimately so. The fire was a small incident that they were able to use. And, you know, if the fire hadn't happened, I guess you could argue that they would have used something else. But it worries me that this event will be used to ramp up the repression of Palestinian solidarity organization that's already happening. And it happens at a time where I feel like the tide is absolutely turning on public opinion and governmental opinion about what's happening in Gaza.
I think we've already spent too much time on this. Doctor and mother in Gaza recently had 9 of her 10 children delivered to her who were killed in an Israeli airstrike. And there were no headlines about that. There was no outrage in the press. Plainly, it's a ridiculous and blatant showcase of the inherent way that the press and the news media just treats Palestinian lives as less valued than Israeli lives.
Thank you, Finn. I appreciate that. I see your argument. It's healthy to have discussion about this. I think that's a good point to kind of tie up this little segment with that reality that there's just so much suffering going on in Palestine, and it doesn't get the airtime here, especially in the United States.
If the roles were reversed and some Palestinian working in Hamas was, assassinated by Israel, as has happened many, many times, working even in the civil wing of Hamas.
Right. So like a government official, like someone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Israel would cheer. The Western media would be like, oh, it was completely justified. They were Hamas. And so it's important to, point out these ethical inconsistencies.
not only that, they'll justify killing the Gazan official, but also everyone in the building surrounding him. So this is an incident that should be kept in its place. And actually, while I saw an initial flurry of news activity, I've seen less over the increasing days. And so there's some hope that this is not going to be used to ramp up the repression. And that may be due to the fact that the tide has really been turning in public opinion. I mean, last week we talked about Miss Rachel.
We sure did.
Everybody's favorite toddler educator on YouTube. Miss Rachel has been out there speaking about the plight of Palestinian children. She has the most adorable videos with this little girl from Gaza.
Rahaf is her name, and she is a double amputee, both of her legs. She's in the U.S. now, learning how to use her prosthetic legs.
And so Miss Rachel has come under a lot of fire, as we talked about, but she's continued to be steadfast in her solidarity with the Palestinians. And, that bravery is contagious. I think you felt that after talking about her last week, Meg.
I did feel that, sort of combined with seeing my son here speak up for Palestinian rights in his school. I feel like this is an issue that we have been told not to touch as leftists. I have made posts on my business's social media account showing support for the humanity of the Palestinians. This last week, I came out with a more, just a straight up, hey, this is going on. I can't just post about these outfits that I've made. I need to speak out about this. I used some words that were stronger, and I also posted my reel to Macklemore's Hins Hall 2 song, which is a movement song, but I find it to be a very powerful song. And you know what? I did get called anti-Semitic. And you know what? I was okay with that, though. That was a very small number, proportionally, of the kind of support that people did show, saying, yay, I'm all here for this. I'm feeling the same way, too. How can we be letting this happen? Kind of like Nathan Robinson in his letter to the ethicist said, like, how can we just be continuing on with life as is and not speaking about what's going on right now in the present moment?
And if anything, your numbers went up on Instagram.
They did.
It's worth saying that, not because, hey, cynically go out there and exploit the suffering of Palestinians to make your numbers go up. But right now is a time to be leaning in. It doesn't require that much bravery to speak up for Palestinians now because people are on our side. I mean, for my whole life, Palestinian solidarity has been confined to these small pockets of the culture, these small militant wings within the leftist movement. You'd go to a protest against the war in Iraq, and there would be a small contingent that was talking about Palestine.
Right.
That's changed, folks. So it's time to lean in. It's time for all of us to be coming out and being loud and clear. I mean, it's working. It's getting up to the highest levels of the governments who have been the biggest allies and enablers of the genocidal violence. I just want to read a little bit from this joint statement from the UK, France, and Canada. And a joint statement's pretty powerful because that means the diplomats from these countries got together and worked and fine-tuned this language. And they said, quote, "We strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza. The level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable." And then they also said that Israel must halt settlements which are illegal, talking about the West Bank.
Well, and they also said, we will not hesitate to take further action, including targeted sanctions.
Yeah, now I will say that targeted sanctions and these calls for the end of settlements are kind of par for the course and have been for decades. The Biden administration issued targeted sanctions against settlers in the West Bank.
Yeah.
So that doesn't go that far, but they are calling for an immediate end to the war on Gaza. People have said this might be a smokescreen for public consumption because they are continuing to deliver weapon systems and so on to Israel. But the need for a smokescreen is already a sign that we are on the cusp of bringing support from these governments for Israel to an end. And it's the time to lean in and make sure that this gets solidified.
Yeah, it really shows that they're weak, they're on the back foot. And if we just keep applying that pressure again and again, they'll have to fold eventually.
I mean, you even saw Piers Morgan, who hasn't historically been sympathetic to this cause, actually agreeing with Mehdi Hassan that he thinks it could in fact be a genocide.
Listen, you and I have talked about this war in Gaza ever since it started, this phase of the 75-year conflict. And I have resisted going as far as you have done in your criticism of the Israeli government. I resist no more. I think we've reached common ground about what we view is happening and has been happening through this period of this blockade, which frankly is just starvation of the people there, including so many innocent young women and children. And I think that the incessant bombing and killing, and we don't know how many civilians have been killed, but it is on a daily basis. It looks like hundreds of people every day, with no apparent attempt, it seems to me, to have any real plan for how this ends or what happens when it ends, other than if you look at what Smodrich has been saying, probably the most right-wing member of a very right-wing government, he is talking in a genocidal language about kicking all the Palestinians out. So I think you and I have reached a place in the last few weeks where we are in agreement.
Figures who would never have said this before are now saying it.
And speaking of genocide, Trump found the way to use that word in the Oval Office this week, meeting with a foreign government, the government of South Africa.
Oh, my word.
This was quite the show. If anyone wants to watch some good reality television within reality, check out the South African visit to the White House. You know, this delegation, I think, arrived from South Africa expecting to have something resembling a normal diplomatic meeting. Instead, Trump treated them to a circus, a media circus. The meeting was held in front of the media with Elon Musk and all these other people packed into the Oval Office, reporters shouting questions, Trump just acting like the ringleader in the middle of it all, talking about white genocide, white farmers killed in South Africa, while the post-apartheid government of South Africa is there just trying to mollify them, and honestly, like a bit taken aback, a bit unprepared for what was happening. In the middle of the meeting, he turns the lights off. He puts on a video that's designed to be a gotcha video on the South African government, showing this fringe political figure calling for shooting white people, and just talking endlessly about white genocide, because there are farmers in South Africa who've been killed. Apparently, the murder rate in South Africa is very high. Black South Africans are actually much more likely to be victims of these kinds of violent crime in South Africa. And the context is that South Africa is the result of settler colonialism. You had the apartheid regime, and the legacy of that is just this stark inequality where white South Africans, although they're only 7% of the population, they own half of the land. So there have been efforts at land reform in South Africa, like we've talked about in Latin America. But the right wing and the white South Africans are exploiting examples of crime to try to ramp that up into something like a genocide. And
it sounds pretty familiar, to be honest, the exploitation of quote-unquote crime.
So check that out if you want some reality TV entertainment from the reality TV host-in-chief. And speaking of the collapsing empire, let's give a little update on what's happening over at Harvard. Again, we just can't cover everything that's happening, but we do want to give an update since we talked about Harvard in a previous episode.
Yeah, so Harvard recently, in their latest clash with the Trump administration, had their foreign visa program revoked by the Trump administration, which basically was the Trump administration saying, hey, we're not going to let you have any foreign students. Any foreign students that you already have will have to immediately transfer to other colleges. And if I understand it correctly, foreign students make up a large percentage.
I think it's like 27%?
Yeah, somewhere around a fourth of Harvard's population is comprised of foreign students. So they're trying to completely dismantle Harvard, basically.
It's absolutely incredible to watch the United States dismantling its empire and, having prestigious universities where the wealthy around the world want to send their children is just an enormous pillar of soft power that the United States has built and maintained. So to watch the administration just tear that apart is amazing.
Right. Can you spell that out a little more?
All around the world, the name Harvard just holds such cachet that going to Harvard even for a year bestows an enormous amount of respect in many places. Lots of leaders, lots of Mexican leaders have gone to Harvard. Lots of leaders of other countries have gone to Harvard. You have economists deployed around the world having been trained, and not just at Harvard, but other Ivy League schools, other name brand schools. It's a big cultural export from the United States. And so by attacking Harvard, but not just Harvard, all the foreign students who are at Harvard who now feel that their lives are in some kind of limbo, threatens that pillar of soft power. The courts have blocked the order, we should say. But if you are studying this country and the administration has just said that your visa is no longer valid unless you find a different prestigious university to accept you. Just the fact that the courts have temporarily blocked that order is not likely to make you feel very safe. And if you're thinking about coming to one of these universities, you're likely to think twice. And so I think that the damage has already been done. And we should say the rationale for what the Trump administration is doing is that they're demanding all of this data on foreign students, including any video and photographic footage of them taking part in pro-Palestinian protests, et cetera, et cetera.
But try as they may, they don't seem to be capable of squashing the resistance when it comes to how our country is sending money and bombs to kill Palestinians. I love seeing the vibrant protest, especially during commencement speeches, that's been happening these last few weeks, because this is, of course, the end of the school year with graduation and whatnot.
Let's go check in and see how the president of Columbia University is doing these days. Here she is speaking at Columbia University's commencement ceremony.
I know that many of you feel good morning, class of 2025.
So they're chanting "Free Mahmoud, Free Mahmoud," and booing her throughout her commencement address. She really just can't get through it.
And doesn't she go on to say something about your class will be tasked something about
the work of your generation will be to shape these interesting times, to define the values.
And of course, Free Mahmoud referring to Free Mahmoud Khalil, who's still in detention, Columbia grad student.
I mean, the students are showing their moral spine here.
Yeah, you're allowed to have moral values as long as they're like vague, inclusion, maybe some like love here and there. But when it comes to actually speaking up about specific and important issues, people like this Columbia president aren't too keen to listen to the younger generation, which historically has had a much stronger moral compass than the people in charge in these institutions.
Well, speaking about morality and standing up for what you say you believe in, we did promise to get to domestic politics here.
Here we are, finally.
And I got to say, this news item took me by surprise. I guess I'm not sufficiently cynical. The Trump administration made big political hay, at least here in North Carolina, about what they said was an insufficient response from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, to the intense flooding that took place here in the mountains of North Carolina following a hurricane.
I just drove through that area of I-40. This is my first time to Western North Carolina since it happened. I saw the images and I knew that places we had been to, that the rivers just basically washed away all the buildings along certain portions of the river. But I got to drive along I-40, which I had assumed in certain spots, like one or two or maybe three spots, had been just swiped by the river and just like carried off, basically, like huge chunks of this massive highway just down into the river and away. But no, folks, it is like 20, 30 miles of just complete wash away of this highway. This is a massive public works catastrophe. And they have now opened just 2 lanes, very slow traffic. And it's nowhere near complete, nowhere near. It was very nerve-wracking to drive through. It was raining when I drove through. The lanes were very narrow. I just drove through Asheville, like huge piles of debris everywhere along the river. Businesses that we had visited in Asheville along the river, in the River Arts District specifically, a lot of artists, that whole area is just devastated. So firsthand knowledge, just visually confirming the disaster relief work in North Carolina is nowhere near complete.
And the governor of North Carolina asked for aid to help clear the roads of all the debris that's still there. And the Trump administration has rejected that. So much for campaign promises. And it's not so surprising, given that the oligarchy is willing to just smash and grab and take everything they can. I mean, we saw everybody lined up behind Trump during his inauguration. All the billionaires were up there.
Flanked by billionaires.
So we got Elon Musk. We've got the guy from Apple. We've got the guy from Facebook, whatever his name is.
The guy from Google.
Zuckerberg. And they're all lined up giving money to Trump. And now we're seeing what fruit that gets them. So the House has now passed Trump's big, beautiful bill, this big budget reconciliation bill that is aiming to take $4.5 trillion out of the economy over the next 10 years and ramp up immigration enforcement and give trillions of dollars to rich people who don't need it. It's going to cost them $4.5 trillion over the next 10 years. And you talk about $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there, eventually you're starting to talk about a lot of money. It's hard to get a real intuitive sense of how big $1 trillion is. So I always like for myself to go back to this little story. If you ask me how long ago, Patrick, was 1,000,000 seconds?
How long ago was 1,000,000 seconds, Patrick?
That was about a week and a half ago, 11 and a half days ago.
Okay.
So I can remember that pretty good. Well, ask me how long ago 1 billion seconds was.
All right, 1 billion seconds.
Well, 1 billion seconds ago, I was a little boy of 13 years old, younger than Mr. Finn sitting over here on the couch. I was 31 years ago, 1 billion seconds ago.
Okay, what about a trillion?
1 trillion seconds ago was almost 30,000 BC.
Wow.
The difference between a million, and most of us think a millionaire is doing pretty well, a billion, there obviously shouldn't exist. And $1 trillion is unfathomable. The brain almost can't wrap your mind around how big $1 trillion is. So to say that the richest 0.1% in this country are grabbing, I think for themselves, it's somewhere close to between $500 and $1 trillion in just tax breaks over the next 10 years is astounding.
What it is it's blatant class warfare. The bottom 20% of Americans who are already struggling to get by are actually going to pay more in taxes to pay for the top 0.1% getting, $300,000 back. Really, it should be looked at as social murder. What they're doing is murdering people, It might be with a pen instead of a sword, but those people who are going to lose their Medicare and are going to die because they didn't want to go to the doctor and bankrupt their whole family. That's murder, is what it is.
And according to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, this sort of team of wonky technocrats that sits inside the Congress and analyzes these bills, they estimate that this is going to throw 16 million people off of health insurance, most of that coming from Medicaid cuts. It's going to take food aid away from 4 million children in America. It's going to end Pell Grants for 1.5 million students. It's going to cut Medicare and Medicaid by over $1 trillion, 30,000 BC. Huge number. And give that top 1% a $664 billion tax break. I mean, that is absolutely criminal.
Right. It's the 1% mugging the rest of us.
And in the midst of it, it also includes the biggest increase ever for these fascist police organizations that are growing like a cancer inside of our national security state. It would increase the budget for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, from $3.4 billion to $45 billion. An order of magnitude larger. There's a historian who estimated that it would give them the ability to detain 100,000 people at a time.
And look, this is just so scary. I mean, I just yesterday saw footage of a young man who was working at a construction site, who is a U.S. citizen, who is also of Mexican heritage, who got tackled and arrested by ICE, even though he was yelling and his coworkers were saying, he's a U.S. citizen, he's a U.S. citizen. People who are indigenous, mind you, to this continent and are visibly so are going to be profiled and must be feeling very unsafe. I mean, look, I look a little Mexican, but I'm thinking of my grandfather when he was a teenager. If this kind of profiling had been happening, I'm sure he would be feeling scared.
This is like a 15 times increase in the budget of the border agencies after the budgets of these border agencies have just been getting inflated year after year after year. I was recently reading one of my favorite academics, Corey Robin, and he makes this point how immigration enforcement has become this monster that can never be satisfied. It's not just Trump. This started under Clinton, and then George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama. They all put extremely strict immigration controls into place. Under those three presidents, before Trump ever arrived on the scene, they deported 28 million people, and more than half of those happened under the Democratic presidents, Clinton and Obama. Biden came in, and he had the highest number of deportations. He had more deportations than Trump had in his first term. So this approach to immigration of having increasing enforcement has been going up and up and up every time. And again, I think I've mentioned that I used to work for immigration advocates, and every year while we were trying to get comprehensive immigration reform, they kept caving in and giving more and more money to the Border Patrol and then to ICE when the Border Patrol was consolidated under ICE. Because the idea was that you give money to enforcement and then later you'll get your comprehensive immigration reform. You'll actually do something about the unjust laws that exist that these fascist organizations are charged with enforcing.
Right. You're throwing a bone to the dog in hopes that the dog will become your friend kind of thing.
And it hasn't worked. And now they're just ramping up that hockey stick of growth. I mean, they are going for it.
Yeah, they really are.
And it infuriates me then to see that part of the bill being reported as the part that's the least contentious. That's the way that a lot of the liberal media has been putting it.
And I do think that what a lot of people are focusing on, because it does affect so many folks and so many people who are working people who have been able to access Medicaid after its expansion. Because as we all know here, anybody who has dealt with health insurance in the U.S., that it is not a fun process to go through. It's very expensive. What my understanding is that they're trying to really up the paperwork and the requirements for applying for Medicaid expansion. And it seems like the result of it will be that a lot of people will not even realize that they've been dropped, that they don't meet the requirements, and that re-enrolling will be a bear of a logistical hurdle to get over. What's your understanding of this?
I mean, yeah, the CBO says it's going to kick somewhere between 13 and 16 million people off of their Medicaid-backed health insurance.
Yeah. And if you hear Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, talking about this, he frames it in that we're talking about adults without dependents who aren't disabled. Basically, they're these men who just sit and play video games all day and they don't work. They're the ones that are on Medicaid. And that is not true. Think about someone who works for Amazon, someone who works for Walmart. These are non-union jobs. So you have people who are working minimum wage jobs almost full time who don't qualify for health care through their employment, who were then able to get Medicaid on these Medicaid expansion bills. So these are the kind of people we're talking about here. We're not talking about lazy guys who sit and play video games all day.
Yeah. I mean, if Mike Johnson wants less people on Medicaid, I have an easy solution for him. Raise the minimum wage and use government positions to have jobs available for people, good paying jobs like was done during the New Deal. Let's get these roads repaired that were destroyed by Hurricane Helene. Let's
put people to work.
Yeah. I mean, we have a massive shortage of well-paid jobs in this country because, the majority of our employers are massive chain stores that just want to maximize profits as much as possible, and that involves paying their employees as little as possible.
And that's the thing about this bill and this oligarchy smash and grab is that they've already rigged the economy in favor of upward distribution of wealth from the poor to the rich. And this is just insult on injury. So it's kicking the poor while they're down. Just this week, we learned that United Healthcare has been secretly paying nursing homes not to send their elderly residents to the hospital when they need it, because this saves the health insurance company money.
Right. I mean, how sick was that? They had basically plants in nursing homes. Basically, if an elderly person had a medical event, they would try to downplay it and not send them in an ambulance to the hospital.
And speaking of nursing homes, what are the Democrats doing to try to stop this big, beautiful bill from coming through? I mean, one thing we have seen is sadly a result of the Democrats continuing to allow the leadership of the party to get older and older and older, is that 3 Democrats have died in office who otherwise would have been available to vote against this bill, and it allowed the House leadership to get it through much more easily. This includes Jerry Connolly, who recently beat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, for a leadership position within the Democratic caucus, despite everyone knowing that he had terminal throat cancer. He sadly passed away just this week. Thus, his family lost somebody, and we mourn his death. But the nation lost a vote that would have been available to stop this bill, which passed by a single vote in the House. So the Democrats going to be able to stop it?
This is class warfare of the 1% on the 99%. You know, as Bernie Sanders is fond of saying, Citizens United was a drastic failure of our democratic system and has allowed corporations and wealthy people to have even more control over who is elected to our Congress and, you know, what they say, how they vote. If we lived in a democracy that accurately represented everyone equally, this would be such an easy political win for the Democrats to grab onto and just be constantly messaging around, you know, the Republicans are going to throw you off of Medicare. They're going to do this, that. They're raising your taxes while drastically lowering them for people who are already making too much money off of the labor you're doing. But they're not. I mean, they're just a completely inept party who are desperately just trying to maintain their own status and positions of power.
Well, we'll see, because this is also a potential enormous political gift that the Republicans are handing over the Democrats. And like I said, they do have to be able to message to communicate it, and it remains to be seen how effectively they're going to do that.
I mean, Pat, I remember when you were messaging on Capitol Hill back when we were, 23, 24? And there was George W. Bush was trying to get rid of Social Security, basically, right?
Yeah, when George W. Bush got reelected, one of the first things he said he was going to do was to privatize Social Security, and it became a huge political fight. And in D.C., to their credit, the Democrats under Nancy Pelosi presented a united front, as they did against this budget bill just now in the House. Every Democrat voted against it. And the unions got on board, and there was just this enormous coalition to save Social Security. But not only that, Social Security is just a massively popular program because it's universalist. Everyone pays into it. Everyone expects to retire and get paid by it. And it really is a really important social insurance program for the nation. Medicaid, which they're targeting in this case, is not universalist. And it does leave Medicaid more open to political attack. Medicare, if they were attacking that head on, I would say it's going to be an absolutely winning issue for the Democrats. But because they're attacking Medicaid, I think that's dangerous for the Republicans. But the Democrats can't necessarily, and those of us who care about it, can't necessarily depend on everybody caring about it because not everyone is enrolled in Medicaid. It's part of the argument why we need a Medicare for all system where we're all invested in the same program. It's part of the argument for universalist programs as opposed to means-tested welfare programs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these systems of marginally trying to redistribute some of the wealth, at least to the bottom sections of American society, they had to be in place, right? Otherwise, the United States would have lost the Cold War. They had to give their population some treats, or they would look over to the Soviet Union and say, hey, those guys have free healthcare. How come we don't have that? Or at least that's part of it. It's a simplified view, but
right. I mean, we also should thank the unions for their militant demand for a lot of these things.
Yeah, definitely. And now the United States is basically unchallenged. In my opinion, it makes these programs all the more vulnerable and is why we need to stand up and fight back really with everything we have.
So this bill has been passed by the House of Representatives. It's now arriving over at the Senate. Now, it's a big, beautiful bill because they're packing it full of things. It's a budget reconciliation bill. And the reason that's important is that in the Senate, we have the filibuster, which means that if any single senator objects to the piece of legislation coming before them, like Bernie Sanders can stand up and say, I filibuster this legislation, then it takes 60 votes in the Senate. So more than the 51 that you would normally need for a majority, you have to get 60 votes to overcome that filibuster. That applies to most legislation going through the Senate, but it does not apply to budget reconciliation bills. And subject to certain limits, the budget reconciliation bill is supposed to only deal with the budget and have nothing that is primarily changing policy. And that brings us back to a very important character that those of us who are political junkies remember very well from the Biden years, the Senate parliamentarian. The Senate parliamentarian is the unelected official within the Senate who decides what is actually part of budget reconciliation and thus immune from the filibuster and what's not. And so we actually have in the Senate, on the Republican side, there are senators like John Thune who are playing the same role that Senator Manchin played for the Democrats last time around. Thune has said that he will not support any effort to overturn the Senate parliamentarians' ruling and put things that are specifically policy focused in this budget reconciliation. So it remains to be seen just how far that goes. And it's not only things that have a policy focus, but the bill is also supposed to pay for itself within 10 years. And this one doesn't do that by any stretch of the imagination. It adds trillions and trillions of dollars to the deficit. So we'll see how that goes. The Republicans are playing with some novel theories on exactly how you calculate cost and so on. And it remains to be seen whether the Senate parliamentarian is going to go along with that. But they have been trying to sneak some policy-related things in there.
They sure have.
I think you found some of that, Meg, when you're in your research.
I did. Hidden in this big, beautiful bill is a policy that would restrict federal judges' ability to hold government officials in contempt. Really what it does is it shields the Trump administration from accountability when it breaks the law.
And we've already seen it trying to break the law so many times, like with this deportation of people without due process to a gulag in El Salvador.
Exactly. So it could allow any government actor to escape this accountability for violating court rulings. It says it would apply to court orders and injunctions issued even before this law takes effect. So it would make thousands of prior orders immediately unenforceable.
They want to go back in time and shield the Trump administration from any illegal activities it's done, including things the court has already ruled it's in contempt for.
Exactly.
Another little policy provision that got snuck in there, and I think it's just so telling about who is calling the shots here, is there's a ban on states regulating the use of artificial intelligence.
Several states already have laws that prevent the use of artificial intelligence, say, for insurance companies using AI to automatically deny claims.
And meanwhile, the federal government has done almost nothing to regulate artificial intelligence because the federal government does almost nothing. Congress is virtually worthless. So the tech moguls are basically asking to be able to play their little games with artificial intelligence in any way they want without any kind of regulation. And that was stuck into this bill, just showing you where the real power is in this oligarchy that we have in power.
It's so laughable because just the other day, the news comes out that this syndicated column on the 2025 summer reading list. It's a column that the Chicago Sun, Philadelphia newspaper, all over the place. This came out, and it turns out it has all of these established authors, but only a handful of the 25 books are actually books. It was an AI-generated article, and it just completely hallucinated and made up all of these titles and this entire, basically, summer reading list. Right?
Published newspapers around the country and nobody caught it.
Nobody caught it. Well, someone caught it.
After it was published. Well, that's the world we live in, folks. Hopefully we can buck up the Democrats just like we can buck up all these governments who are beginning to protest the ongoing onslaught in Gaza. Our solidarity with everyone facing starvation due to Israel's blockade on aid. Solidarity to everyone threatened by immigration enforcement and threatened by cuts to Medicaid. We are The Left Unsaid. We will continue to come to you weekly. Check us out at theleftunsaid.net, where you can comment or contribute to the podcast. And check us out on YouTube. We have had a little surge in viewership on YouTube, and we're hoping to keep that going. We think the fraction of people who want to listen to us and don't know we exist is pretty significant. So if you can help us get the word out in any way you can, we would deeply appreciate that.
Yeah, leaving a rating or a comment on any platform would be much appreciated.
And in the meantime, if you're looking for something to do, and if this big, beautiful bill of ours makes you a little mad as well, your Senate offices are the ones who you need to be calling right now. And for those of you like me, which is ironic because here I am talking on a podcast, but I really hate talking on the phone. I'm an introvert and it gets my blood pressure up. You know that you could call after 5 and you just leave a message and just let them know how angry you are about this.
And it is important because they do tally up those scores, and it has some impact on how much political cover these Republican senators will have in supporting this anti-poor legislation.
That's right. So get out there, do a little activism, make your voice heard. And also, if you want to be part of this conversation, leave us a message, write in a question or comment, or go out to theleftunsaid.net and record your little message, and we will play it on air. And we would love to welcome you into the conversation.
I'm Patrick McElwee.
I'm Meg.
And I'm Finn.
And we'll catch you next week.